talk about platform leadership 101 and basically how to start right and to continue awesome through the platform engineering journey. Um, a lot of successful initiatives have good, strong platform leadership at the center, and I want to give you some tools in that space today that you can use inside of your own platform engineering initiatives. So, who am I? Well, I am Mallory, and I am a platform therapist, jokingly is what I call myself, but I am also a platformengineering.org lecturer. So, I do a lot of teaching in this space, a lot of coaching. That's really what the platform therapy is all about. And you may see me giving quite a few talks as well as teaching the platform engineering certification courses. Um, you can email me, you can find me on the Platform Engineering Slack, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm based in Canada between Toronto and Ottawa, so it's good to see some folks here from that. Now, if you are seeing a black screen, I just noted this inside of the chat. Make sure you actually hit, sometimes Zoom will have tabs. Just check, make sure you have the screen sharing tab open. Just a quick note. That does happen sometimes. It will have two tabs, usually the different folks in the room, and then the other tab will often be the actual screen share. So just give that a shot. Okay, so let's get rolling then, because I feel like we generally get a lot of questions in these conversations. So what I want to talk about today is a couple different things. I want to talk about why platform engineering initiatives fail to begin with and go over some of the things you can do to avoid these common reasons for failure. I want to talk about a few key leadership concepts that you need to have inside of platform engineering initiatives in order to be successful. And that is things like the platform as a product mindset, as well as strategies like the minimum viable platform, the MVP. I also want to touch a little bit on aligning on vision. So making sure that everyone else is on the same page as you are, and how to do that and how to go beyond the basics of platform engineering. What is really interesting is that when we start looking at the statistics and the research that's been done in this area, 67% of platform engineering initiatives fail. You're probably wondering why. And I think, there might be some obvious answers, but there may also be some non-obvious ones. And it's important to check out a couple different reasons and maybe explore what the best practices are. What I'm going to do is share with you best practices that relate to what we're going to talk about today, so you can keep those in mind if you may be coming up against some of these roadblocks. It looks like some people, Carla, are having issues with the presentation. All right. Is there any problem with the presentation? You can't
I'll
hear
check that
anything.
out now. I'm doing that now. Sorry, one second.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure everybody can hear. Okay, and it is being recorded, by the way, so if you do have an issue with the technology, if for some reason Zoom isn't playing nice, we will make sure you get a copy of the presentation. And like I said, you can always follow up and ask questions. Okay, so let's start with one of the most common reasons I see that platform engineering initiatives fail. The first is that people move too fast and they rush towards complexity. It's very it's very easy to fall into this trap. It's very easy to think that you need to solve all of the problems of the world at once and get there as fast as you can before you actually get adoption, before you can actually release the platform into the wild. But in truth, that doesn't work. Don't chase perfection. What you need to do instead is start slow, embrace a continuous improvement mindset, and think about stuff like the MVP framework, which we'll talk about a little bit later today. Don't get yourself rushing. Take your time, be slow, think about the future, and really rate yourself. Sometimes it helps to have someone in charge of making sure you stay realistic. One of the other reasons I see things fail often is that teams will focus only on tools and technology. This is a fundamental mistake. It's very easy for people who come from an engineering background, like myself, to just get stuck here, to get stuck on tools, technology, toys in the sandbox. But in reality, those don't solve problems. Platform engineering is 10% technology, 90% culture, 90% change management, all of the different things that come with exploring a new way of thinking and doing. Technology is only a tiny part of this. The platform as a product mindset will help you stay on track here. And this one is so easy to not even realize you're doing until it's far too late. So keep that in mind. If you see a problem and the first thing you want to do to try to solve it is to find a tool or to find a technology for it, just take a step back and make sure that you're not falling down this path. The next thing people tend to do is build useless platforms. There are so many stories. In fact, there are a couple platform con talks about this, about how easy it is to build a platform no one wants to use and no one will adopt. The way you get around this is through solving actual problems and driving value against those problem statements. So it's not just a blanket, we just want everything to be better. It's not, we just want DevX to get more awesome and we want to make sure you guys are happy. Have actual, real value that you're trying to drive and actual, real problems that you are trying to solve. Both the platform as a product mindset as well as the MVP framework lend themselves really well to keeping you on the right track here. Not only to understanding the problems you're trying to solve, but understanding how to continuously drive value against those problem statements. The last one I want to bring up, and I think this one becomes more and more apparent to me every single day, is that teams think developer experience is only about developers, and this will cause them to fail because they end up way too focused with a single viewpoint and blinders on. Instead, you need to work collaboratively and you need to be cross-cutting. Cross-cutting concerns are incredibly important. You need to collaborate with security, you need to collaborate with infra and ops, DevOps people, you need to collaborate with finance. There are so many different layers of stakeholder that you need to consider for developer experience as an initiative to work. It has to go well beyond devs, and you have to think about impacting people beyond simply those developer teams. So inside of the platform as a product mentality, as well as the MVP framework, both of these things are addressed. So one of the things I mentioned is that you need to have continuous value and you need to drive continuous value. Think about leading this way. And I will show it in a way that sort of ties it into a couple key persona groups. Now, if you've seen any of my talks before, chances are you may have seen exactly what I'm going to show you here, but I want to explain it to you in the sense of how you can use it to drive value from a bottom-up approach. So when we start walking into a team and working on platform engineering initiatives, what we really try to do first is isolate pain points. And we tend to isolate them against two groups of people. So on one side, we have developers. So for them, the pain points can be things like missing self-service. It can be that things are slow. It could be that they have to wait for stuff and throw things over a fence to get anything done. It could be that cognitive load. Things are complicated. Things are hard. And that makes their job and their day-to-day life very challenging. On the other side, we also see pain points that are related to things like insecure configurations and low standardization. Those go hand in hand, by the way. We see manual reviews. We see ticket ops. We see cost spiraling. There's a lot of stuff on both sides of this bottom pyramid that do kind of interconnect to each other, but generally we can separate them out. What's important to do with pain points is to transform them into value. And value drivers are going to be the thing that you will really lead an initiative through. We can look at these in two key categories, and I want to think of it a little bit like archetypes. So on one side, we have developer experience-focused platform engineers, and these tend to be people that come from developer backgrounds. Generally speaking, the values that are important to them are things like automation. That makes developers happy. DevX platform engineers are going to have that bias. On the other side, when folks come into platform engineering from an infrastructure background, we call them infrastructure platform engineers, and they are all about standardization. It is really important that as a leader in platform engineering, you identify the members of your team that come from either of these sides and make sure they realize that they're biased towards these things. What's also important to realize, though, is that they can't work without each other. They have to work together. And this is why representation inside of platform engineering initiatives is so important. The way to really drive value is to understand how these things impact folks day to day and how you can take them beyond just impacting developer experience as well as infra and operations experience. When you think about countering this bias, realize that you can't have automation without standardization. There's no point. And you cannot standardize well without automation on the top. When you do these together, as I said, the value goes beyond just these two groups of people. It actually can go up into the business. And one of the things I want you to do is always to make sure you are tying your platform engineering value into business impact. Your CEO does not care what your pipelines look like. Does not matter to them. What they want to understand is how the money and time you are taking to build a platform is impacting their time to market and their competitiveness, the costs, especially cloud costs, and the output of time related to money. And also, if you are able to actually push through and innovate as an engineering team and get stuff done. There's other things like uptime, SLAs, SLOs. There's all sorts of things that those folks care about that a platform engineering initiative can push into. So keep that stuff in mind. Lead through continuous value and don't ever forget about how to tie things into the business. When we start looking at driving value, we also have to look at the platform team and the stakeholders, and we can't forget about them at all. When you look at the platform engineering team, it is a group of people that are building, running, and continuously improving that internal developer platform. One thing I will note is that they can be archetypes. This doesn't necessarily mean you have to have the full-time role of a head of platform engineering. Maybe you also do something else. This might be the start of your initiative, and it's okay to just have that archetypical role. It's not uncommon for that platform product manager to also be a product manager for an application developer team. Totally okay. Just make sure you have the representation on these things. The other thing that a platform team does is manage the stakeholders throughout the entire organization. So we have some of them listed here. We have executives, compliance and legal, developers, security teams, infra and operations, architects. All of these different groups are important stakeholders that have to be managed throughout a platform engineering initiative. And good platform leaders will make sure they are doing that from day zero. These folks need to be involved. Platform as a product is an ideal mindset to have when you are approaching managing these stakeholders as well as the team itself. So let's take a look at that. Platform as a product is was kind of defined very early on in 2018, and I think if you read the actual article that's linked here, that this quote comes from, you'll see a lot broader context. But what we'll do is just distill it here into something quick and easy. So Evan Bottcher's definition of a platform as a product is a digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support, which are arranged as a compelling internal product. So the other way you can think about this is a platform engineering team is in charge of a vending machine. Inside of that vending machine are products from your infrastructure and operations team that also have things from security and finance all woven in that you as a platform engineering team make available to your developers. Your job is to maintain the inventory of that machine, maintain its functionality so that when a developer requests something, they get it, maintain stability of the machine, and make sure nothing goes stale. So that's an interesting way to think about it as a product too. Platform teams should be considered a startup, basically, inside of their parent companies. So your product is that internal developer platform, and you are the startup inside of your parent company's basement. If you think about it this way and you take that sort of startup product mentality, you will have a much easier time scaling it. Why? Because you aren't bogged down by the bias of a massive, massive overview right away. It gives you a little bit more power to start small and to think scrappy. This matters because understanding developer pain points and building something that is actually useful and compelling to them is the only way you will actually get adoption. We do need to consider all stakeholders in the process because we want to make sure everything is taken care of and that the standardization layer is in place. But at the end of the day, if we are not understanding developers' pain points and we aren't building something they want to use, why are we even doing it? So the platform as a product mindset is really what you need to have here. A couple things about platform as a product. It is a key pillar of platform engineering as a whole. This is basically probably the most fundamental principle, I think, inside of this whole game. It really is about ownership. So instead of working on a project that is finished at some point, platform teams treat their platform as a product for the entire life cycle of the thing. That never changes. It never goes away. Don't ever chase done inside of this because there's no such thing as a product being completed. Products always iterate, products always change. And it's so important that the platform does the same. It can't stay stagnant or it will die, to put it fairly bluntly. When you start doing this, you have to shift your perspective a little bit. And that perspective has to be that the developers that are using the platform are treated like your customers. They are your customer in this case, and they're the folks that you have to understand and also make happy. So, some of the product management basics that you'll want to bring into your initiative are things like user research, user centric design, product roadmaps, feedback loops, product marketing. That one's really, really hard. And the reason why is because folks from an engineering background or from a DevOps type background find that challenging. It's a big mind shift, or a mindset shift. You now have to think more like a marketing, a sales, a product person as opposed to an engineer. You want to tinker with stuff, you want to use technology to solve problems, but the fundamental truth is that to do this right, you have to think of it like a product, and that means changing a little bit from engineering mind to product manager mind. So keep that in mind too, and be fair to yourself because it is hard. I love this meme because I think it's a really interesting way to talk about how problems tend to happen in this space and what the main challenges are. But it's very, very common that this sort of thing happens. You have a roadmap, you've built it for this product, this platform that you have, and a CIO walks in with a feature idea and just steamrolls your entire roadmap. This happens all the time in products as a rule, regardless as to whether or not it's a platform. And you have to know when and how to push back against this sort of stuff and to make sure that you really stay honest to that roadmap. Some of the challenges you will face in a platform as a product journey are things like just a shortage of product manager talent. Not everybody can think that way and do that. There's always the question of should we hire someone or should we get someone internally? And I think that's a delicate balance. I think you have to tread carefully there, and make sure that you're not rocking the boat too much while also making sure that there is unbiased and relatively fresh perspective. And on that note, politics is something that does, will, and absolutely can cause chaos inside of platform engineering initiatives. Good leaders in the platform engineering space are aware of the politics that they are going to be coming up against, are aware of the key issues politically inside of their engineering orgs that they are trying to serve, and are thinking very clearly early on about how to respectfully work around those political boundaries. One thing to note that you will come up against is change is scary. This is a continuum inside of, any technology space. There are always going to be people that are afraid of change for whatever reason that might be. It might be that they're afraid of being made irrelevant. It might be that they're afraid of losing control over something and not necessarily having the visibility that they want or need. And this is why it's so important to understand the pain points and be able to drive value to them. It's also important to be empathetic. It is scary to change sometimes. The wrong metrics can also bite you really hard in these initiatives, and I encourage you to think carefully about what you are doing here. When you look at metrics, you need to not only consider things like DORA. I love DORA metrics, though they are a lagging indicator. You also need to look at leading indicators, things like measuring complexity, measuring how long it takes for someone to onboard. Maybe you have metrics related to throughput or SLAs, uptime, all that fun stuff is important to measure. And one thing I would encourage you to also think about is stuff like satisfaction scores. So developer CSAT, developer net promoter score, NPS. So a lot of different things you can do there. And finally, the last one on this list is listening too closely. It is important to be empathetic to your users, and it is important to listen to their problems. But what you see on the surface may not actually be the solution they need. And this quote from Henry Ford sums it up quite well. If I'd asked customers what they'd wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. They wouldn't have asked for a car because they didn't know that was a thing and they didn't necessarily see the value in something like it. They just wanted their horses to be faster. It's probably going to be the same in a lot of your platform engineering initiatives. Some people will say, well, yeah, I just need more control and need to be able to do write all my own Terraform and deploy all my own Helm charts because it's just gonna be easier if I have full control over that. But is that actually the solution? Why are they thinking that that is the way to go? Probably instead, what would be easier is if there was a standardized layer that was automated. So no one had to worry about configuring those things and breaking stuff along the way. So that is what I mean by listening too closely. Be empathetic, but have a filter and be the annoying 7-year-old child and ask why constantly. So let's look quickly at the minimum viable platform and how you can use this in order to be successful. So the idea behind it is that it is a foundational version of the platform. With it, we want to very quickly demonstrate value and support scalability without requiring extensive early development. So we generally use this inside of platform engineering to build ugh, talking is hard in the afternoon, simple but functional versions of IDPs. So that really, in terms of scope, it needs to meet basic needs, it needs to provide stakeholder two values before committing to a bigger scale rollout. The idea here is that it is a start small and scale up sort of approach. It is scope limited, but it showcases a potential path to something better. It is a core concept of modern product management and lays the foundation of this platform as a product approach. So if you think of a lot of scrappy startups, if you think of a lot of products, how they tend to start is a minimum viable product. It's not pretty, it's not elegant, but it serves a need and it serves a customer base. And the more customers that product has, the better the feedback that comes in and the more that product can evolve towards what they truly need. So if we start small and we think about scaling sensibly, we can actually get somewhere pretty cool. But what does it mean by actually starting small? This is a reference architecture diagram that is really scaled back for the context of an MVP. And you can see a couple things here. We have eliminated monitoring and logging at an advanced level, as well as too much of a security plane at an advanced level. Yes, you should have good security by design inside of these things, but for the sake of an MVP, you don't need to put in every single tool you have. You may want very basic secrets management, but you don't have to go all out. Keep it fundamental, keep it under check. So what you'll see here is this is a multi-cloud IDP under the hood, but we've grayed out a bunch of stuff on the multi-cloud side that for an MVP just doesn't make sense. It is nice to be able to say, yes, we can take this thing multi-cloud, but what's important is to show what actually happens to developer experience and in terms of standardization and automation that you're putting in place. So that is the key outcome. You want to showcase the path towards something better without over-engineering it from day one. The whole idea is that you make platform engineering very, very predictable. And if you make it predictable, it's much easier to swallow and much easier to adopt as a practice. Start small, scale up. So we think of this in terms of programs. And if you approach it in your planning and your documentation of your planning as a program with key outcomes, key durations, key next steps, you are more likely to have adoption or at least get the funding to head that way. The reason why? You've planned stuff out. You're not just pulling it out of the air. So we start with the minimum viable platform program, the MVP. At the most, this should take you 8 weeks. That is how scope constrained this thing needs to be. I have seen these done in 5 days. Very quickly. It can be done incredibly fast if you have the right team working on it and you know what you're trying to do. The outcome is what's important. You need a demoable first version of that IDP running and able to be demonstrated and used. After this, you'll roll into something called production readiness. And what that is about is really about getting a team using that platform every single day. But we don't necessarily want to deploy to production. We just want to be doing production grade work. So what's important is their day-to-day developer experience, not necessarily actually deploying to production. That tends to be the least painful of all the things you have to do in your day-to-day. Instead, it's the day-to-day development work. It's the, hey, I need to go from local to development environments that are painful and through your QA cycle. So that's what we focus on inside of production readiness. That also is a max 8 weeks. Keep it really constrained. After that, you want to build yourself an adoption program that supports large scale adoption. It sounds easy, it's not, but you'll have laid the foundations for what that has to look like through the MVP as well as production readiness and giving yourself a head start on how to think about adoption at large scale. The overall goal of your MVP needs to be to show value within weeks, not years. You need to generate stakeholder buy-in and you need to maintain that. So if someone asks, what's in it for me? There should be an answer for that persona group. Your goal is to ensure long-term funding, long-term team allocation to this, and you want to make sure that you are keeping that in mind as you're going through the process. And it also is about setting the stage for adoption. It's about building that fundamental scaffold and building the house on top of it. So that is how you need to think. When you look at designing MVPs, there are four primary things I want you to keep in mind. They need to be representative. So it shouldn't be a weird outlying tech stack that you design the MVP around. It should be representative. It should be something that the average engineer, the average developer can walk into and see themselves inside of. So if you use Postgres inside of your MVP. Don't go out and use MySQL. If you have basic CI and CD that everyone uses, let's say GitHub Actions into Argo, build that in as well. If that's what most people use, you want that to be in there. If your application structure is fairly similar, so there's a front end, a back end, and a data layer, have that in there and have an example in place with similar properties. So if you're a Java shop, don't use a Python app for your demo. Basic ingress and DNS is also important here because this is a big problem with a lot of development teams. So make sure that they can see themselves in this process and see their own applications in it too. It also needs to be repeatable. So what you are doing in the MVP needs to be something that you can reuse again as a quick start for onboarding other applications and teams. So the discovery work you'll do, the actual implementation work you'll do, all of these things need to be repeatable and the way you approach them needs to be repeatable. So don't try and just do something a one-off weird way once just because you think it might be easier. Make it repeatable and give yourself the ability to do this again and again. This is the foundation, the quick start from which the full scale platform is built. Make sure this is also iterative. So MVPs are focused around the future. The context of creating what you are doing now is that there is growth in the future. There is growth that is planned. You need to be committed to scale. You can't start at scale. So start small and think about the future on the horizon. You're going to build roadmaps. You're going to have ideas. That is how you need to do it, but keep yourself honest on the scale. Finally, it also needs to be innovative. So the way I like to think about this is to inspire people. Don't undermine them. The idea behind platform engineering is to give people their time back to do what they do best, which is things like building applications. MVP teams should be pioneers that are driving new ideas forward, that are excited about the future. The MVP should be a way to inspire not just the people contributing to platform engineering, but the folks around it in the idea of doing something different in order to have better outcomes and to engage with maybe new technologies. That's an incentive for a lot of people. There's a lot of things you need to think about in terms of how you keep it innovative, but in reality, it really is about not undermining people and not invalidating the fact that, developers want to build and they want to be able to do it well. All right, so let's now look at staying aligned and staying collaborative. So how do we keep everyone on the same page? Some important notes on alignment that you may come across. So technical complexity and estate sprawl needs to always be something you're going to keep in mind. This will help you stay aligned across not just the first teams you work with, but the ones beyond it. Some organizations also require a much higher level of stakeholder management to get entire org adoption. So it goes beyond just the CEO or CTO signature that you might need in a smaller company. You probably need a lot bigger buy-in than one single person. And that stakeholder management may be a much more intense process depending on the scale of your org. That scaling and adoption also needs to be incredibly well planned and well managed. It has to be collaborative. You can't just work solo here. You have to start cross-cutting from the beginning. One other thing I want to note is that outlier use cases may indeed actually be very critical components, and you might have to consider them being built in sooner than later. And what I mean here is if you are generally speaking going to start with a fairly representative first app after MVP and PRP, let's say you're trying to find out exactly what you're going to do next, you may want to look at how the different applications and the different teams in your org are dependent on each other. Is there a data service that everyone needs to consume and that is a giant pain to consume and work with? Maybe that's what needs to be built in next. Is there a common shared dependency inside of one application? So maybe it's some sort of API, or maybe it's some sort of CDN or something like that, that is incredibly important to other apps inside your organization. That may have to go first instead of how we would traditionally maybe look at adoption, which would be the teams that are needing the most help. If it is really, really important that it's shared and has a lot of touch points across different applications and teams, that might just have to come first. So how do you counter these things and how do you think about them? So that technical complexity, you need to plan around it. Have a focused and phased project plan and roadmap. Always have your eyes on the overall technical complexity that you're going to have to face. Keep it in mind that you are going to iterate towards it. And this is why having that phased project plan and roadmap is so important. Break it down, make it make sense in steps. Those high level stakeholders that are a giant pain in the butt because they absolutely need to know what's going on constantly, but also need a lot of value shown to them. Keep them engaged early on both the value and the return on investment that they are authorizing. I cannot stress that enough. If that means that you send weekly updates on what you're doing on the platform team and how that relates to a business initiative, maybe that's what you do. It looks a little different depending on your team, but make sure you're doing this. In terms of that collaborative work, you need to have strong and aligned project and product management collaboration between platform and application teams. So your platform will have product and project management, and so do your application teams. These folks need to work together. The reason why is because they need to collaborate not just on outcomes, but on timelines, on scope, and on the strategy for getting there. If they don't collaborate, this will fail. I have seen it happen where a product like an application product team will sabotage a platform engineering initiative because they don't feel that they are being collaborated with enough and asked really how they want things done. So make sure that that works well. Build that migration strategy considering those weird outlying use cases early if that is something that you need to do. So try to understand, and this is part of understanding the technical complexity of the estate you're working in, what those interdependencies are. How do all the teams rely on different services that are available already? And how do you need to make sure that you service the teams in the way that they need? One other thing I want you to think about is flagging the minefield early. So all of these things really can be identified as risk points and red flags early in the process so that you know if you see a red flag, you could have a potential issue. I try to get people to do a risk analysis and to, even if it feels silly, just dump on a piece of paper somewhere what they see as potential issues and what they would identify as a red flag for that issue so that they could get in and either fix it early or counter it early. So do that and have a lot of flexibility for going back and reevaluating these constantly. I like to say you could have go or no go points on certain decisions. So, if you want to try and implement a certain feature into the platform and you are not seeing performance change after you do it for X amount of days, maybe at that point you kill that feature and focus on something else instead. That's the kind of stuff that you need to do. And that makes really strong platform leadership. So if you want to learn more about all of this stuff and go beyond the basics, there are some really interesting options, including obviously the whole platform engineering community, PlatformCon talks. There's all sorts of stuff on YouTube these days. Then you could read the 3 bajillion articles on LinkedIn, Medium, and all those other places. But what's important is that your organization needs consistency. And if you're doing platform engineering, it is not enough that just you as a leader understand it. Do your team, do your colleagues, does your boss, does upper management, they understand things in the same way you do? And are you all aligned around the same concepts and ideas? Because if you aren't, I see it happen all the time. things happen. What one team interprets the platform as is a completely different thing to another. How many people here think IDP means internal development portal versus internal development platform? That is a very common misunderstanding that I see. So the way to really approach this is to get everyone on the same page. And the way you'll want to think about this is through standardized industry leading training that is proven to do this. You want to be able to give the resources, skills, and knowledge to the entire team, not just on the technical side of things, but the business side of platform engineering as well. So this is stuff like internal selling. It's getting stakeholder buy-in. It's building and keeping that momentum that is so important to long-term adoption of platforms. And I want to share a little bit about the platform engineering certification program that we have here at platformengineering.org because it really is a great way to get this alignment and to avoid having the problems that happen when no one is on the same page. So, a couple different things. The individual platform engineering certification is a thing for individuals. I've been really lucky to teach a lot of this course, and it's honestly really amazing to see the different folks that come into it and see what they get out of it at the end. But we also are now launching organization platform engineering certification. So check that out. You will get this slide deck and the links to these things, as well as the recording of this particular session. But look into that because I think if you really need to get the organization aligned, it's a great way to do it. I do quite a few of the teachings for this and the training for this. I'll even come to you in person and you can deal with me face to face. That's always fun. I love seeing how teams work in person, and then everyone also wants to share their favorite local beer with me, which is always appreciated. Um, but I think there's a lot of different things you can do when you start looking at doing it organization wide. That alignment is powerful, and you will save a lot of time and you will save a lot of money because you haven't wasted time. You're all ready to go from day -20. So just a couple screenshots here. There's some cool feedback we've got on the course, and then one from the platformengineering.org training page as well. But like I said, you'll get a copy of these links. Now that I have told you how you can listen to me more, if you weren't already absolutely bored of what I have to say, let's get to some questions.
Yes, thank you, Mallory. Guys, you can pop your questions into the Q&A section or on the chat. We actually have already one question from Mike. He's asking what considerations impact when building a distributed deployment, that is, various organizations operating their own enclaves, etc. Thinking data mesh here with distributed data domains, that is, organizations, etc.
Well, I mean, you could call this probably just fleet management, by another name, but what is really important here is understanding the goal. Why are you building a platform and how is that why going to align with what those distributed teams, what that fleet is essentially trying to achieve? So if you are trying to achieve unification amongst all of these different groups, if things are so disparate, it's a pain in the ass to manage. That is a very valid reason to build a platform. But with that, that's a lot of change. You're now asking all of these people that do things their own way to come together and have a single way of approaching problems and a single way of building software. That is challenging. That is really hard. So, it is possible. I've seen it done, but what you have to do is really start slowly in that case and really prove that value at a high level in order to convince those people they need to change. And what I would do in that circumstance is really start with the part of that organization that is struggling the most. Maybe they're really struggling with cloud native development. Maybe they are, being forced to migrate to containerized workloads, and that scares the heck out of them. Maybe they're really struggling with Kubernetes as a concept, but you want to be using Kubernetes and they're being pushed to go that way. I've seen quite a few teams migrating off of VMs to Kubernetes. And honestly, I see a lot of pain points for developers. Like that happened to me when I was working full time as an engineer. That was really stressful. So, focus on the folks that need the help, and then you'll be able to prove the value to everyone else that change is worthwhile doing. But that will probably only come with time, especially for the teams that are hyper dependent and hyper comfortable in a cloud native space.
Great. We have another questions. How open source projects can help in building a strong IDP, which is flexible?
I think, there's a nice mix of vendor-based and open source in most platforms. So one of the rules I have for building platforms is um, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't, you know, fall off and trying to think that you could build Argo CD yourself and build it better because you probably can't. There are a few scenarios where custom building things is worthwhile, but for the most part, I will say what I tend to see is a mix of open source software and vendor stuff. Vendors are cool because innovation costs money, and that means that you're often able to get something very powerful that would take you a long time to get to parity with, at a fraction of the cost it would take you to get there. That's why these things exist. It's why SaaS as a product type is a thing. Let people specialize in what they specialize in. Now, there are ways to also waste a lot of money in platform engineering initiatives. There's a lot of blog articles about this, and I gave a webinar actually last week about portals specifically in this context. So spend your money wisely and even just spend your time wisely with open source stuff. Really explore what you want to do. But yeah, a good mix, I think, does a great job at giving people what they need without having to reinvent the wheel.
Great. What quality checks could be expected in a platform pipeline?
That is a big, broad question, and it really depends on what you are doing and who you are and what your team is working on. What quality checks are in place for a ginormous bank versus a small startup working on I don't know, a classified ads app? Not the same. Um, the question you always have to ask yourself is, if you are really intent on putting a manual review and quality process in, what is the goal of doing it manually? Why is it required? And what is the benefit of doing it that way? In a lot of circumstances, many things can be automated. You just have to learn to trust the automations you build. So that is an interesting exercise. But obviously, in big federated governed organization types, it's hard to do. I mean, banks are banks, healthcare, for instance, um, really proprietary technology. There's a lot of checks and balances in place. So you need to design your pipelines according to your need, not just because someone on a Medium article told you you should automate every step. So this is really why it's important to treat it like a product and really understand what you are trying to achieve in your own context and who you are building for.
Great. Here we have a good question. How does an organization size impact the lessons advice offer in the slides? Will a smaller
Mhm.
size company be ready for an IDP versus a medium size or a larger size company?
I mean, so fun story. I still build a lot of my own projects. I code for fun now. It's a very strange thought. I build myself a little platform. Honestly, because I'm lazy. And by lazy, I mean efficient. So I think everybody can benefit from a platform in some way. And remember that the idea of a platform is to make it easy to get stuff done without having to jump through hoops that are on fire every single time. What scale that means, it just means that when you look at the reference architecture diagram, for instance, it looks a little different. The complexity may be smaller. Um, you may have a lot more interchangeability between components because you're still not sure what you want to use. I think every team can benefit from this mindset as well, especially if your goal is to scale. So, like for me personally on my own projects, I never know when someone else might want to work on it with me. If I make it really easy for them to work on it and they don't have to spend a lot of time trying not to break stuff, it's a significantly easier time. And same thing at larger scale. Once you really understand the problems you're trying to solve in your own space, I think platform engineering really is applicable as a concept. The change management alone, the cultural practices that are inside of platform engineering as a philosophy are very, very valid across all scales of organization, from individuals to like 100,000 developer organizations. So yeah, and in terms of actually the training on the website, how that looks from a cost perspective, I am not a salesperson. Don't ask me. Reach out to the team and they can give you an idea. I just deliver the stuff, honestly.
Great. So there's this question. Our system has a few and very separated developer-facing internal services. What are the initial steps to combine them into a platform?
Oh, cool. I really like that. Well, I would start by looking at how people interact with those services currently and what the adoption of those services is. So is everybody using it? How do they feel about it? What's great? What isn't? How does it make sense to tie them together? So is there a unifying abstraction that you can put on top of them to tie them together? Or are they better off separate and maybe existing in some sort of catalog somewhere? So, maybe you write a different API endpoint for them or something. The way to think about it, though, is to unify them under a central API experience for the platform and then build whatever kind of either front end abstraction, so like something like a portal over top of it, or just give people access to an API. But consider how they fit together, how they need to be unified, and how to put them essentially under inside of that vending machine and what that vending machine means for you.
Okay, Tyler is asking, what are some common strategies for mitigated conflicting ideas within a platform design? Tech, infrastructure, resources, policies.
Boxing gloves and a ring. Sometimes you just need to fight it out. Actually, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Though I've seen some really good arguments happen. It's really important that everybody sits together. This sounds so like kumbaya around a campfire, but you all need to sit down and you all need to talk your shit out. Um, and you need to be open and honest with each other. If you can align on the outcomes, it's easier to eventually align on the technologies underneath. And you know what? There's a lot of value in having that platform product manager, that platform lead, even be the person to sort of mediate those discussions and keep people on track and sort of say, okay, how does this help us get to this outcome at the end of the day? It's sort of like you need someone to reality check everyone and bring them back in because there are always going to be arguments about technologies. I sat with a team a few weeks ago in person for a whole week, and a lot of it was honestly disparate opinions on what they should be doing to achieve the same outcome. And at the end of the day, I had to keep them a little bit realistic about the fact that, we can't achieve everything all at the same time. We have to scale up. Maybe someone has to concede that part of this will go on a roadmap, or we have to really evaluate why you're using that tool to begin with or why you're doing something that way. So like let's say, you have two differing opinions on an observability solution. Okay, well, let's explore why you have different opinions. Why does someone not like one versus the other? What is actually the purpose here? What often happens in platform engineering, like design conversations, is that a lot of trauma comes out. So a lot of people will essentially dump the issues they've had and how they've been burned in the past by different kind of initiatives that have been brought in, different kind of change management approaches that have been brought in. There's a lot of really kind of tough questions that get asked. And I think in that way, it's why I jokingly call myself a platform therapist. But if you have someone on your team that can take that role and take those things that come up and explore them further and really understand why and what those are symptoms of, I think that's really impactful. And, once teams realize that that's what you're doing, like, look, we're trying to explore how to get to this outcome. And this is a symptom of why this is a problem. It's easier to get alignment. But boxing gloves are also completely valid.
Okay, what are your thoughts on in-house versus external development platforms?
Well, I think you can learn a lot from building your own internal platform from external stuff. So learn a lot from the hyperscalers. How does AWS, GCP, Azure, Red Hat OpenShift, the one from them, how do they build their systems, their platforms for their customers? Everything's available. You can get it via API. You can get it on a portal or a UI. You can get it via CLI. You have a lot of choice. How do they encourage you to get started with it? How do they train you on it? How do they get feedback? Some of them are better than others. How do they document it? Again, some of them are better than others. But you can learn a lot from the hyperscalers about how to think about your own internal product. And I think, even if you look away from hyperscalers, if you look at um, like SaaS companies, for instance, that offer developer tools, so stuff like Stripe, things like Shopify, and other similar companies, how do they make things available to developers that want to work with their platform externally? You can learn a lot, I think, from their documentation, and I think you can learn a lot from how they abstract the underlying complexity of their own system. So I know this because I worked there, but at Shopify, they really went hard on GraphQL, opinionated on that as various people are, but they use that as an abstraction layer for all of the data that exists inside someone's store. And the way they document it, the way they made it available, not just to developers, but also to merchants themselves, so the owners of the stores, is really interesting. And I think is a good example. Or any of the other SaaS products that have their own like QL language, their own query language. Um, that's a really interesting way to think about making things available too. So you can learn a lot from just looking around at some of the products and services you use every day. I hope that answered that.
What is the best way to measure platform maturity?
There is a platform engineering maturity matrix. It is also known as a rubric. You should be able to Google it. If not, I think Carla, can we find it on the platform engineering website? Maybe send that out. Um, it's very handy, but it also, it gives you a lot of goalposts that you can reach for as long as you're honest in your assessment with it.
Great. We have another question. Will performing a cost-benefit analysis prove to be useful and relevant on what to build or integrate for an IDP?
Always. Always cost benefit analysis, return on investment calculation. This is something we cover in the fundamentals course because there's a lot of things that you can show from a financial perspective and from just like a time cost perspective that are important to think about. And, we provide a lot of templates for doing this, a lot of ways of thinking about it, and a lot of things to avoid when you do it. So, yep, it's always a good exercise. Even if you already have buy-in essentially to a full term or a full-time kind of team, but also a full scale platform, do it because it is an easy way to continually show the value in what you're building.
Thank you. Would you suggest an internal developer platform for COTs applications?
My brain is shut off. You're going to have to remind me what a COT application is, unless it's in here somewhere and I can read it. Oh, my poor brain.
I think it means, if I'm correct, commercial off-the-shelf
Oh,
software.
I mean, I think anyone could benefit from a platform. Um, Commercial off-the-shelf software, really like to integrate that into the platform, lots of value there. To build one for a team, building commercial integrated software, value there. Um, I mean, I've yet to see a vertical where it doesn't necessarily make sense to even just start thinking this way or find some way to unify sort of that developer experience and unify the life cycle of an application under one singular platform. Like I've yet to see um, a vertical where it doesn't make sense.
Great. Um, okay, we have one. It says, what role does FinOps play in platform as a product?
Great question. So FinOps, you need to make happy because they like to give you money or they take it away. One thing you can do is when you're starting to connect dependencies, when you're starting to build the pipelines in the platform, building, the recipes for how dependencies will be created or lifecycle managed, build in the requirements from FinOps. So things like tagging so that they can backtrace and allocate cost to a business unit to an application. it's so easy to just go to them and say, hey, what is the best way for us designing the different products in this platform or the different services in this platform to meet your needs from a reporting perspective and an observability and cost management perspective? Maybe they say to you, hey, if you're going to make ephemeral environments a feature in the platform, they have to be killed after 24 hours. Or, hey, it would be really useful for us if on the weekends you could shut down non-production environments or spin them down. Those are the sort of questions you can ask. But if you do that early on, it's just about building those relationships too, and being able to go back and forth with them.
Okay, we are running out of time, but we can maybe share some more questions, the last ones. How important is to foster collaboration across teams and stakeholders before building an IDP in the first place? Any advice on steps to approach that effort?
Do it now. Don't wait. Get everyone together, build a working group, go out for drinks, go out for pop or soda for the Americans in the room. Um, get that collaboration as early as possible. There are going to be people who want to have these conversations. Build that team of pioneers that are willing to do something different and try this out. Start it early. Start before you even plan the platform, because they are the ones that are going to have a say in what the thing has to look like. This could be just folks that moonlight as other roles, and they just want to kind of step in and take on part of this initiative on a part-time basis, and that's totally fine. And in order to get that started, that's generally how it works. But start that as early as you can, and continue that relationship uh, throughout the whole process, and have those representatives from each of the stakeholder groups be part.
Thank you. Okay, let's go for the last one. It's a bit long. We have a large scale Rails monolith driving 90% of our application functionality. The other 10% is a mix of Python and other services that do all sorts of things. We don't intend to split up the monolith anytime soon, though we do use Packwork to modularize it. Given this kind of architecture, how would you approach an MVP?
Start with a Hello World app that is representative of that monolith. So, what database types are you using? What libraries might be in there that are really important? What is the CI/CD look like? It doesn't matter if you replicate the monolith for the MVP, because you shouldn't, to be honest with you. You should just have a Hello World type thing that is representative of it. I do a lot of my own work in monoliths, to be honest with you, because again, lazy. Actually, efficient is probably the word I want to use. And to be honest, like, yeah, as long as you could just build something that's fairly representative of like the technical picture as well as the day-to-day kind of workflow. Like, okay, I commonly do this task on every single day or every once in a while, and it's a giant pain. Can you put this in the platform in that very small Hello World context and show me how it could be better? That's how you have to start. So I would just build a little dummy Hello World thing and go from there.
Great. Well, thank you guys. That was all for today. We run a bit of over the time. So yeah, anyone that didn't get to have their question answered, just remember I share on the Slack and in the chat the Slack link, and you can just shoot your questions there. Well, thank you, Mallory, and yeah, hope to see you soon.